Okay. All right. Well, good morning, afternoon, evening, everybody, wherever you are in the world. It's 1 p.m. here for me. To get started, again, my name is Jim Donahoe. I work for a company called RDX inside. It's right outside of Pittsburgh in a suburb called Warrendale. We'll get started here in a minute, but just a little bit about me. I do about anything as a DBA. I'm not a database admin. I work a lot with Azure. I'm a big video game enthusiast. I have a ton of retro video games in my house. I'm a nerd. I don't work with big data. Again, I'm an Azure enthusiast. I was a former United States Marine. I'm also an Idera ace. If you're not familiar with Idera, definitely check them out. They have some really great software. They also provide a really good PowerShell library for everybody to use if you're just getting started with Azure and you're looking for a bunch of PowerShell resources. Definitely check them out. Here's my website. Here's some of my contact info. My contact info is also at the end of the slide too. Again, if there are any questions, please just put them in the chat. We will get through the questions at the end. If we don't get to your question, I promise I will give you an email to answer. So enough about me. This is what the agenda we're going to cover today. What is Database as a Service, or DBaaS, how to configure it, how to configure your firewall, because as a Azure database administrator, you're also going to be responsible for your firewall normally, auditing and threat detection, automatic tuning, resource locks, some alerts, how to set up geo-replication, and your basic maintenance for your instance. A lot of these, I'll have some real-world examples that I went through when I was working at a former company putting their applications into the cloud. So I will give real-world examples of things, but we'll get started here. So the biggest thing I can remind you is I want you to remember out of this is that there is no cloud. It's just somebody else's computer, right? All this cloud is a big Microsoft series of data centers across the world that have tons of resources for you to use. There's no pretty rainbows or unicorns carrying your data around. A lot of places or a lot of folks think that the cloud is just some really cool high-tech machinery. It is really cool the way they do things, but it's just a computer. Don't get intimidated by it. One of the main questions I also get is, what are the different as a services and what do they mean? Well, I found this chart online, and this is a great representation of how things are broken out into the cloud. So today, if you're on premise, you're responsible for everything over here, your networking, storage, the OS, anything else, right? A lot of places, when they go to Azure, they want to do infrastructure as a service to start out, just to get their feet wet. We also refer to this as IaaS. That's this column. Microsoft, in Azure, Microsoft is responsible for these bottom four items for you, right? You're still responsible for the OS, your runtime, the data, and the applications that you put onto the VM, but Microsoft's taking over the hosting and everything. Platform as a service, you see in Azure, Microsoft takes over more. You're only responsible for your applications and your data. For software as a service, you see Microsoft manages everything. But if you notice, we didn't mention database as a service, right? How come? Well, my thing is it's kind of a mix of platform and software. It is a data platform, but it's still SQL Server running as software. So database as a service, I consider its own column. It's not added in here, but that's why you won't see database as a service here. But this is the Wikipedia definition of database as a service. I promise I won't read these through to you. Jason will have access to my slides. He can upload it and you can go through. But here is, sorry about that. This is the link to that definition that Wikipedia has. But enough of that stuff. Let's get into the nuts and bolts, right? So most of you, I'm hoping, have actually installed SQL Server at one point of your lives, right? If you're like me, you have to point and click and type all kinds of stuff, and it takes you have to read through all these things. Well, if you're deploying it from the portal, this is your installer right here, right? You got to name your server, You're going to give it a server admin login. Now, mind you, you can't use SA or admin. Those are reserved by Microsoft. You can use like super secure user, which is a lot of the times I use in my demos. And it has to be a strong password. One of those ones where it's like capital letter, symbol, first letter, first initial, and then your numbers, all that stuff. Make it as secure as you can. Then you have your subscription option. This is where you're going to deploy, what subscription you're going to deploy your server to. You can have multiple subscriptions in Azure. A lot of places, they like to break them up. You'll have a production subscription, you'll have a QA subscription, and you'll have a development subscription. Make sure you pick your right one. Resource groups are very, very important when you want to organize all of your resources in Azure, all of your objects. I like to create one for each region, or if I'm doing some proof of concept work, I make a resource group just for that, because then when it's time to remove that, all I have to do is delete the resource group, and anything contained in there is removed on delete. Think of a resource group as a folder on your Windows file structure. It's just holding your data. You need to choose your location. This is the Azure data center you're going to deploy to. If you want to try to choose the one that's closest to you, that's good. That usually works best. When we set up geo-replication, I'll show you, which ones you can choose from. And then this checkbox down the bottom, allow Azure services to access server. This is really important. If you're building applications in Azure and they need to connect to your database, you have to check this box. They have to be in the same subscription, and you have to check this box. Otherwise, they won't be able to connect. So here's our first demo we're going to do. I'm not going to use the portal because I like to do things faster. So I like to work out of templates or PowerShell as much as I can. So we're going to go to my PowerShell script here, and you see I have it filled out pretty much. I'm already logged in. We're going to create a resource group name called Cloud Virtual Group Demo. I'm going to deploy this into Central US. There's my username and password. That's what my server is going to be named. And the IP addresses we're going to cover when we go through the firewall, and then it's going to create it. Now, just to show you that there's nothing up my sleeves, there's no magic behind this. This is my SQL servers. This is showing you every SQL server I have, all resource groups, all locations, right? So we're going to run this. Okay. And we're going to let it go. And hopefully, pretty fast, we'll see this pop in here. If we want to see if it's actually working, I can go to resource groups, and we can see my resource group is already created, Cloud VG Demo. It hasn't made the server yet because it's probably still populating all this into the Azure Fabric, but it'll be here soon. Sometimes you have to go out and refresh a few times. Let's see. It's still running. We'll give it another 15 seconds here. If it's not completed, we'll go forward and then we'll come back to this to show you the server. But I'm in Pittsburgh. It's snowing, so maybe the internets are slower today. I don't know. I was testing this before. It did not take this long. Okay. All right. Well, we'll just move on for this. We'll come back to it. But all that's doing is it's creating my server that we're going to use later on in this demo. From here, we're going to go to the firewall config. Now, remember I said that as a DBA, I do about anything, right? So when I first started working with Azure DB, not only did I become the database admin, I also became the networking admin for that instance. And there's a few other hats you wear as well. But here's the networking side of it. The way you gain access to your database as a service instance is all IP-based security, right? Here's that. Remember how we checked that box before? When you go into your firewall, you'll see this toggle, allow access to Azure services. You can turn it on or off. Right now, mine's on. Usually by default, it's on. If you turn this on, this is going to allow access from all or any Azure resources in your current subscription. It won't go cross subscription. It's only in that current subscription. And then down here, you'll see you can add in your IP address of computers or servers that you want to access your instance. You can also set these to ranges. Now, a lot of sites that I've worked with as a consultant now, they'll put in single IP addresses for everybody that's working from home or for vendors that are working out from a different site. What I like to do is recommend that they get onto the corporate VPN and you only have the corporate VPN IP address range in here. Otherwise, you're going to have to start maintaining a giant list of IP addresses, and then let's say somebody leaves, you have to make sure you go in there and remove their IP address. Or let's say their modem restarts overnight, they get that nice little package upgrade from Comcast, and they have to restart the modem. Well, if they get a new IP address, they're going to try to connect in the next day when they want to work, and it's not going to work, and they're going to call you saying, hey, I can't get in, is the instance down, and you're going to have to go in and put the new IP address in. Again, these are real-world options. This is something that's happened to me plenty of times. I've had plenty of developers that were having, repeated their routers, their modems all the time. I got tired of adding in IP addresses, so I worked with our internal networking team and got the corporate VPN added, and it worked like a charm. Auditing and threat detection. Now, this is a separate feature for Azure DB, and by separate I mean it has its own cost. Okay, some features in Azure DB will cost more than there's an extra cost. I'm sorry, on top of the service, right? So auditing and threat detection lets you know if there's malicious activity going on towards your server. So you'll see here, it's $15 a month per server. That's what it was when I looked these up. Now, the pricing could be different. Please don't quote me on pricing. It could be free now for all I know, but when I did this before, it was still $15 a month. You get alerted an email for any security issue from Microsoft. In the Microsoft walkthrough, in this link here, it'll give you specific information. The way I know this works is, if you're familiar with OMS, we were using OMS in Azure to monitor some of our VMs and everything else we had. We had it deployed throughout different continents because I was working for a healthcare company. I received a probe from the UK into one of my US servers. Now, being that the UK, the NHS rules are that the patient data is not allowed to leave the UK shores, I got nervous because it shouldn't be allowed to hit that server. So I got my alert from Microsoft saying, hey, there's access from this IP range. What do you want us to do? Well, being that it wasn't supposed to do that, I hit block. So Microsoft said, okay, it blacklisted that IP range inside of that server so that that IP address can no longer hit that box. About 20 minutes later, our OMS admin comes in and he's like, hey, I can't reach this server. I'm trying to get it to it from the UK. So, oh, well, that was you. Now I know $15 a month was well worth it because you weren't supposed to do that. Shame on you, right? The more threat detection and auditing detection you guys can do on your servers, the better off you are. If you look at recent examples of all the hacking attempts that are going on around the world, WannaCry, all those things, $15 a month is pennies compared to how much it will cost you if something gets stolen or hacked from you. Automatic tuning. This is always one of my favorite topics. A few weeks ago, you would have saw something from Oracle saying, in 10 to 15 years, the traditional database administrator's job is going to be gone because of an automatic tuning database. Well, I'm going to tell you that he's wrong with SQL Server. Here's why. Automatic index management. I can't see your hands, but I'm hoping a lot of you are nodding along when I'm asking these questions. How many of you ever manually added an index to see if it speeds up your operations? Right, with DBA, you probably do it pretty often. How much time do you spend on that on a weekly basis? Me, probably about an hour or two, depending on my client and depending on what else is going on. How much time do you spend doing performance research weekly? I'd spend a good bit because everybody wants their data fast. Everybody wants it nice and quick, right? Always trust but verify. Enable this on a test instance, on a test set of data, and verify what it's doing. It's enabled per server or at a database level. You can inherit at the database level, and I'll show you those. But this is how it actually works. It's using machine learning, right? It's also using the DTA. And if you trust the DTA, then you probably already have enough problems with your indexes, right? What's nice is that with the automatic tuning is it will add an index, but if it doesn't get the performance it wants, or that it thinks it's going to get, it will automatically remove it as well. It'll also email you and say, hey, I want this index. It'll say, can you add it? Or you can hit yes or no. If you hit yes, it'll create it for you. Test it first. Make sure you're going to get the performance out of it that you want, because it's also going to add to your overhead for maintenance. This is where it's at. This is where it's turned on. Now, mind you, again, this is on my server level, you can see, because it's a firewall here. When you're looking at your databases, you won't see a firewall option. You go to automatic tuning. Select on to enable auto tuning actions, on and on, right? I have them off because the only database I have on my instance is Wide World Importers, and I don't really do much with it. You hit apply, and then they're turned on or off. Now, if you turn these on the server level, on your database, they will inherit automatically, okay? If you do not want it inherited, you have to go into each database and say you do not want this turned on. So if you're splitting production and test data on the same instance, and you want to do these on test but not prod, make sure you turn these off on your database for the production databases. I need to get a drink here, guys. I'm sorry. Okay. So let's go back out. Let's see where we're at next. We'll go to that. Let's go back out and make sure my script completed. Okay, so the script is done. So now if I refresh my resource group here, I should see my SQL server, floppity flippity, right? There's nothing in here. Everything's empty, which is good. There shouldn't be anything in here. All we did was create the server. Here's my firewall. When I spun this up, I asked it to put this IP address in there, which is the IP address for my VPN and where I am. If you would try to get in from anywhere you were, you would not be able to get in because your IP address is not in my firewall. So just to show you, like I said, just to show you that this was not smoke and mirrors, that the server was there. Now we see them both. There's flippity floppity and floppity flippity. East US 2 and Central US. So we'll get back to those when I want to show you the geo-replication. Resource locks. At my former company, I had a lot of problems with too many people having access to our Azure subscriptions. Too many people had administrative rights to our subscriptions. They could remove resources. They could move, change them. They could do whatever they wanted to them. I didn't want them to be able to do this. So by using a resource lock, it prevents them from doing certain things. And we'll go through them here. So as an administrator, you may need to lock your subscription, resource group, or resource to prevent other users in your organization from accidentally deleting or modifying them. There's two types. There's a delete, means authorized users can still read and modify it, but they can't delete it, right? If they try to delete it, they'll get a nice error message, and I'll show you. Read only means you can only read the resource, but you can't delete or update it. This is bad for your database as a service. You can only imagine the kind of havoc you would cause by putting a read-only lock on your database as a service database. I've done it for fun. Just to see how long it takes my developers to realize that they can't do any work. I've also done it by accident. If you're going to use these for your instances, please only use delete. The only thing with these is that there's no unlock. To remove a resource lock, you actually have to delete the lock and then recreate it once you're done. Unfortunately, that's the only way it works. So if I would put a resource lock on my resource group, I wouldn't be allowed to delete anything inside of my resource group. If I had to delete something that was not deployed correctly, I'd have to delete the resource lock, then go in and delete the resource, then recreate my resource lock again because there is no unlock option, which kind of stinks, but it makes it a little bit harder, but that's the way it should be. You don't want to have to delete anything that shouldn't be deleted. This is what they look like. It's a little blurry, and I apologize. I tried to get as better shot as I could, but I had to stretch it out. But this is the add lock. The lock name I used was please do not delete me. It was a delete type. And in the notes, it says, please don't delete me. QA needs me. Right? So if somebody would try to delete the resource this was on, they'd get an error message in an XML. And then if you parse through the XML, you would see that note. Right? That's what I wanted. I wanted to make sure they did not delete whatever resource this was covering. The next section we're going to cover is alerting. A lot of you are DBAs or developers or even managers, and you're interested in what kind of alerts am I going to get from Database as a Service. Well, some by default, there's plenty of alerts out of the box. But the important thing to know is that the alerts in the Database as a Service are per database. They're not per instance. It's because of the way the environments are configured. To find your alerts, you have to go onto your database in the portal, go down to alert rules under monitoring. To add an alert rule, I cleared out my resources. Don't worry about that, why it looks so scratchy. But here's your name, your description, and the metrics are what we look at. These are all the different things out of the box that Azure will give to you for monitoring right now. Blocks by firewall, CPU percentage, DTU percentage, database size percentage. That's one of my favorites, and we'll go into that. So here's one of the ones I created. On a Friday afternoon, I had a group of people that needed to deploy a hotfix to my production environment to do some auditing. What they didn't tell me was how much was going to be audited. I was smart enough to know, because it wasn't my first rodeo, that I needed to make sure that they didn't blow up the database. So the way this worked was we had a log database. Now the database itself was only about 1.5 gig, and that was from about a year, about 16 months of use, right? It was provisioned for 500 gig. I created this alert saying log database is huge. If the database size goes bigger than 450 gig for the last 5 minutes. So what happened was they started logging everything, and on Sunday morning I got the nice little email saying log database is over 450 gig, right? Well, this gave me time to email them and say, hey, the log database is going to fill up. You guys need to get your data so I can truncate. Again, these alerts come with the databases. There's nothing extra for these. So Replication Setup. This is always fun too. As a DBA, you guys have probably configured some form of highly available or disaster recovery or an always on. If you have, you probably, when you first did it, you probably beat your head off the wall the same way I did when you didn't do it right, or something wasn't working right, or you restored your database without using no recovery. It's a lot of different options, right? This is what the setup looks like in the portal. What if I told you can configure this to be HA in seconds, right? You're probably saying, If I told you configured your DR for database as service in seconds, again, And I can do all this through the Azure portal just by pointing and clicking, right? No more do I have to type in IP addresses. Do I have to get my Active Directory admin to grant the rights? None of that. It's all done through the portal. Here's our flow chart to set it up. Now this is on my server. This is on the database again. So you'll see this database name is Jim Testing Stuff. It's a SQL database. I'm going to go to Replication. From there, you'll see that there's no secondaries configured, and I'll show you this in a live environment. I'm going to create a secondary. It's going to go to my central US. My database name is going to stay the same. It's going to be a readable secondary. My target server is going to be what I create. And here you go. My secondary is being configured. And that was it. So for a demo of that, let me go to my primary instance. right? So here's my primary instance. Here's my database, Wide World Importers. You see, it's not a really highly used database. Geo-replication. I want to configure this for Central US. So you can see all these different green dots or these different green shapes here. These are all the data centers that I can geo-replicate my database to. I have a server in Central US already, so I'm going to choose that. If you do not have a second server configured already, that's all right. You can actually configure one right through here when you pick it. You can create a new server right through here. But since I have one, and in the interest of time, I'm just going to pick the one I already have created. We're going to talk about what an elastic database pool is here at the next slide. I do not want to set one of those up. And here's my pricing tier. It's a standard S0, 10 DTUs, 250 gig. My secondary can be higher in service tier. So if I wanted to put this up to offload reporting, maybe, I could put this up to premium tier so it gets solid state drives to back it up for the IOPS. But just for the purpose of our demo, I'm going to leave it at the same storage, at the same level. It cannot go lower. I can't try to offload and make my service tier lower, so I couldn't put this down to a basic. It can either be equal or higher. So we're going to hit OK. And here it goes. You'll start seeing the arrows moving from East US 2 to Central, right? And then once it's done, the line will become solid. We'll come back to that. We're going to let that run. It shouldn't take long, but I didn't think the other one was going to take long either, and I want to sit there and wait. So an elastic pool. It's not one of those little vinyl pools you buy from Walmart or your local retail chain. It's actually a really good thing if you have multiple databases in Azure Database as a Service. So an elastic pool is a cost-effective solution for managing and scaling multiple databases that have unpredictable or varying usage demands. In other words, let's say when I first started with working with Azure, all of my databases had to be Premium 2 because of the size, and they also needed at the time, they needed to use column store indexing. Now this was 3 or 4 years ago. Column store indexes are now included, but back then it was only Premium. So I had to have all my databases as a P2. That was pretty expensive. Here's some more info on Elastic Pool, but one of the best things I could show you is the cost savings. This was the former company. So we had 52 databases at 744 hours, which is a month, at 1 terabyte of storage, right? Now these are P2 databases. This is how much it cost us a month just to store our databases, $53,000, right? It's a pretty big chunk of change. So where's an elastic pool comes in to save me here. So with one elastic pool, I create this in the same data center. It's going to give me 4,000 eDTUs, which is just an elastic database transaction unit. I'm going to get 4 terabytes of included storage. I get 100 databases per pool. And that's how much it costs me per month. It's $30,000 difference, right? So remember how I told you we're wearing many hats as database admins? You're also going to be, the financial consultant for databases. You show your boss these differences and they're usually pretty happy with you. Like, you just saved us 30 times 12. I'm not a math wizard. Math is not my forte. But it's a lot of money. It's a pretty big bonus if they do those, right? But that's the beauty of an elastic pool. If your databases aren't going to use the amount of resources they're provisioned, and you have multiple, look into using an elastic pool. These are offered in standard as well. If you don't need to be on premium, they have standard elastic pools. The sizes are getting increased because everybody's moving to Azure and their databases are bigger. Make sure you check out that documentation link I sent you before in the previous slide. It'll show you all the recent updates. So let's check on our deployment. Okay, so now I can see it. The line's solid, and here it is. Central US, it is readable, right? So if I go to my other SQL server now, floppity flippity, I will see this database, right? There it is. Now I won't be able to do anything with this database besides read from it. I can't insert because it's read-only. That's one of the cool things. Now if I want to upload reporting to Central US, because I have people on the West Coast and on the East Coast, instead of making two servers, I put it in Central and say have at it, right? Makes it easier. But that's how easy it was to set up. It didn't take hours. I didn't need multiple teams involved. I just pointed and clicked and it was done. But on that note, the next thing we're going to talk about here is a failover group. Now, if you've ever installed a Windows cluster or even an always-on group, you're familiar with either the cluster fully qualified domain name or your listener name for the always-on group, right? Well, they don't have those things in Azure. Your database as a service instances are just a name that you give it, and the address is the name.database.windows.net. Well, if you have an application that needs a connection string, let's say your East US2 server goes down and you've got to go to your central server. Well, they can't have the same name, so you have to go in and manually update connection strings. This is where a failover group will help you. A failover group, you're using geo-replication. It still requires a manual intervention of updating connection strings to repoint your application. With a failover group, you won't need to do that. You configure one address, and in the event the primary fails, the connection string does not need to be updated. Again, think of it as a Windows cluster name or your always-on listener name. This line is no longer applicable. This is not in preview anymore. It is now GA. It's an awesome feature. I will show you how we create these right now. So I'm going to go back to my primary instance here, flippity floppity. One of the requirements is that you have to be geo-replicating. We already are, so I don't need to do that. So we're going to click on Failover Groups. I'm going to hit Add Group. Failover Group name, we'll just call it Flop Fail. Configure my secondary server. I want my Central US to be secondary. Read-write failover policy is automatic. This grace period is important, okay? What the grace period is because primary and secondary databases are synchronized using asynchronous replication, you can't change that. It's always going to be asynchronous. The failover rate may result in data loss. You can customize it to reflect your application's tolerance by data loss by configuring this here. So you can control how long the system waits before initiating the failover, in other words. So if you want to wait an hour because maybe it's just a network blip or something happened and they're bringing new storage online, you can wait for an hour before you fail it over, right? Now, if you don't want to wait an hour, there is a manual way you can fail it over, and we'll show you that. But if you can't wait, if you're willing to wait the hour and not worried about losing data, or you're worried about losing data and want to wait the hour, 1 hour is as low as you can go. So the only database I'm going to have is wide world importers. Again, this is database driven. It's not server. So if you can't just put your two server names, it's going to grab all your databases. You have to do it per database. So there we go. We're going to create this. I'm going to give it a couple seconds. If it's not done, we'll continue on and come back again, because we have about 20 minutes left and I want to make sure we get the questions. Okay, so it's still deploying, but we can see the basic stuff here. Here's my resource group name, or I'm sorry, my failover group name. My primary server right now is flippity floppity. My second server is floppity flippity. It does have an automatic failover option after 1 hour, and it only has one database. But let's click on this. So you see this read-write listener endpoint. This is going to be your primary listener. This is what you want your applications to point to, right? You would give it that endpoint there. Now, Another trick to this is, and I always have some of my clients get confused, is you think you can connect to this via Management Studio like you can with an always-on listener, right? You're wrong. You have to put your database name in front of this. You can only connect to single databases. The reason for that is because your master database is not in, you cannot replicate your master database. The next time you log into Management Studio, notice that when you log in, the default database it chooses is master. Since master is not in this failover group, you can't authenticate, therefore you'll get a login failure. Change this to have your database name in front, then have it .server name, .database.windows.net, and you'll get in. Your secondary, your read-only, is what you should point your reporting to. Now this way, if these servers have to fail over, you don't have to say, okay, Power BI, please point to flippity floppity rather than floppity flippity. This connection endpoint will never change, right? To fail this over, well, let's do this. We'll do a forced failover. We'll switch secondary databases to failover group, right? This operation may cause data loss. In other words, it's not going to wait for that grace period. It's just going to do it right now. So we're going to do it. We're going to say yes. So now you'll see the arrows pointing back, right? So it's seeding the data from central back to east. It's doing its transaction logback restores. It's getting everything synchronized. And we'll give it a few minutes and we'll come back because we're going to run short on time if we don't go. So one of the other beauties that Azure does for you is some of the basic maintenance for you. By basic maintenance, I say, what I mean by that is they do your backups, right? Backups and integrity checks, Microsoft will handle, kinda. Your backups, you get a weekly full, hourly differentials, and transaction logs every 5 minutes, right? You can't control how often your database is backed up. You can configure something called a long-term storage Azure Vault, which it'll put your full backups into. In case, if it's say your HIPAA or PCI and you got to retain that data, you can have it. Microsoft put those into there when they back it up. It's an extra cost because that's your storage, but if you need to maintain it or retain it, that's how you would do that. Otherwise, you'll never see them. Integrity checks, there really is no documentation on how the integrity checks work or how often they're done. From what I was told is that it's basically they choose randomly which databases to do on which day. It's a random schedule, but they are doing them. Indexes and statistics. You are still responsible for maintaining your indexes and your statistics. There are ways to do it. I'll show you, I'll log into Management Studio here in a minute, and you'll be a little confused because you won't be able to run an agent job. The agent is not available in Database as a Service. What we use is something called, I use automation runbooks, right? Here's a nice blog post about how to set these up. The common way of performing these is automation runbook, like I said. Here's what one of those look like, right? Now again, this is something that you have to pay a little extra money for in Azure, but it works out well. You'll see you get your, I pass in all my credentials in. Here's my job start. It's going to execute a script against my database saying, hey, we check your fragmentations and all that if you need updated, but it works really well. It's very low maintenance. It's very low impact. It works very well. Okay, let's see. Let me show you Management Studio here. So like I promised, here's Management Studio. These are all the options we have. Now I'm logged in with the admin account. I only have access to my database and security. There's no management. There's no agent. Under the databases, the only system database I see is master. There's no TempDB. There's no MSDB. No model. Nothing like that. The master, it's even limited as to what it shows. There's some tables in here. Security is very different with Azure. When you're trying to deploy your database, use the migration assistant. It will tell you what users will work and what you got to change. my security. Here's my admin account, right? And if you look at roles, see there's a couple new ones. DB Manager, right? Again, these are different roles for Azure Database. There's a really good Microsoft document out there about those, and I will share that with the slides later. But make sure you read through these. That way you have the best info you can use when you're setting these up for your users to gain access to your instance, right? Another thing that you can't do in Azure, let's say, let me do a new query. I'll go to my master database. Once it opens, oh, I'm sorry, it's in dark. Right? Let's say, oh, I don't want to use master. I want to use wide world. Let me zoom in on this a little bit so you can see it a little better. Wide world importers, right? It gives me the hint. Let me try this. Nope. Use statements not supported to switch between databases. Use a new connection, right? Because if you look, I'm connected to master. So in order to work with wide world importers, I have to right-click and new query on that. While we're doing this, this brings up a good subject of cross-database queries are not supported. You have to create what's called an external tape. A lot of my clients have some trouble with that. That's a little bit of a deeper dive into Azure. We're not going to be able to get to those today, unfortunately, but I'd love to come back and tell you guys more about it. So some free resources for you. Your local past chapters. Ask your questions there. Get your speaker's contact info and make sure you reach out. Twitter. I'm very active on Twitter. My Twitter handle is going to be coming up here at the end. Those two hashtags there will get you an answer pretty fast if you're having a problem. Glenn Berry writes has a great series on diagnostic information for DMVs. Check those out. Alan Hurt, if you're not familiar with Alan Hurt, he's my go-to resource for anything always on, clustering, any kind of that. I always go to Alan and ask him. And then here's some other ones. SentryOne, they Plan Explorer. Their software actually monitors database as a service now. So if you're looking for additional monitoring besides what Azure gives you, you can use SentryOne. Virtual past chapters, like we're here today, making sure you check those out. openedx.microsoft.com. Use that for any Azure training. If you go to the Microsoft Academy, it has the old portal, which is going to be retired at I think January 8th of 2018. So if you want to look for free training, check out openedx.microsoft.com. So Jason, that's what I have.
All right. Well, we have a few questions here.
Okay.
First one, do you always need to do geo-replication before having a failover group?
That's a good question. I've never set it up without doing geo-replication first. It's going to have geo-replication put in place because that's the way the failover group works. So if your question is, does it configure geo-replication inside the failover group creation? I've never tried it that way. If it doesn't, I'll tell you what, let's find out. If you want to ask me another question while we're doing this, Jason, go for it.
Sure. The next question is can you explain the read-write failover threshold when creating the failover group?
The read-write threshold. Sure. Okay. Let me just delete this one real quick, just so we know, because we're going to try to do this the other one. Yes. Delete that first. Really good questions. Can you repeat that second one for me, Jason?
Yeah, sure.
Second.
Can you please explain the read-write failover threshold when creating the failover group?
had to make it stick in my mind, otherwise I would forget. So let me go back here. Okay. So I'm assuming you're talking about the failover policy or this grace period, because this is the only thresholds that I know of, unless you're talking about the one that's created. But all this is saying is that you'll wait an hour before trying to fail it over because you don't want to allow the data loss, right? So if again, I'm thinking that's what they're referring to. If not, please speak. I'll let Jason know.
No, they replied back with yes. That's what they're looking for.
Okay, cool. So let me go back into this geo-replication. We'll turn this off to test the other gentleman's question, or lady. Stop replication. Were there other questions, or just those two?
No, there's a few others.
Okay, we can go through the others while this one's going through.
Okay. The difference between an availability set and failover groups in Azure.
Oh, good question. So availability set applies to VMs. What an availability set does is it creates a second copy of your VM, but it doesn't allow it to be in the same rack, right? So if you're creating a VM, let's say in central US, and you want to make sure that VM stays up even if Microsoft pushes updates, you create what's called an availability set, and it makes a second VM in a second rack so that it never gets rebooted at the same time the other one does. So availability set applies to a VM. There's no availability groups and databases as a service, but you have the geo-replication and the failover groups.
Okay. And then with that read-write failover threshold, follow-up on that is this is because of the async replication, correct?
Correct.
All right.
Right. Yeah, and you cannot configure. You can't change that. It's always going to be asynchronous. You can never set it to synchronous.
Okay. If you set the database FW, e.g. with explicit IP or Class C range, surely any attempt outside that block would be immediately refused. If true, then how come there's a $15 monthly optional security monitoring, based on the example from the UK?
Right. So if you're going to, allow that big of a block, then, I would lock it. When you're setting these up, you should lock it down to the IP address ranges that you know that your company uses. I would never go with a whole entire Class C block because, like you said, I wouldn't know who's valid and who's not. It's a lot of addresses to keep track of. Does that make sense? So we're going to try this failover group without having it geo-replicated, and we'll see if it actually does it. We're going to do this from Central US. Okay. So it's deploying. Now I don't know if that means that it's creating the geo-replication or not. We'll find out when it's done. But I'm assuming it's gonna, if it didn't fail right off the bat, that it's going to, create the geo-replication for me. So, were there any other questions?
Yeah, there's one more. Can you please recap on automatic tuning, i.e. pros, cons, misconceptions? What are its benefits to a DBA?
Good question. So let's go to my primary server here and go to my database. So I was telling you before about how it's you can set it up on the server level. So here it is, automatic tuning. Now these have changed since my slides were made. You can see force plan, create index and drop. Now these use Query Store, which is really cool. If you're not familiar with Query Store, you should check it out. You can inherit these from Azure, or you don't want to inherit, right? It says it's recommended to allow it to set automatic tuning. I don't let it do it. So right now, mine are off. I don't know how far depth I can go just because I rarely ever use them. But if I do turn these on, what will happen is I'll start getting notified saying when a query workload runs, saying, hey, we'll probably get a better performance gain out of this index being added. If it does add it and it doesn't get the performance gain at once, it'll go through and drop it itself. It'll send you a notification saying, I dropped this index. The forced plan, it'll send you a notification saying, we're going to force the plan for this query, and it'll give you a reason. That's about as far in depth as I can go. Again, it's one of those things you got to turn on and just let it go through to see what it's going to recommend, and then you test it to see how it works. The link I provided in the slides is a really good explanation of the in-depth side of it, the internals, how it's working with machine learning and everything. I would refer to that link if you want to get more technical details.
All right. And I think we've got time for one or two more. So with Azure making the database hosting so easy, what does the traditional DBA need to do to keep up, not losing their job? What are the next avenues for learning because of the daily maintenance is almost gone with Azure?
Right. So just because the maintenance is gone, doesn't mean anything that's going to be taking away from your job. They're just doing the backups for you. That's cool. But with Azure Database as a Service, performance is different, right? It's not like I can just say I have 26 gig of RAM in my server and then tune for that, right? If your database only has 10 DTUs and your boss is saying, I can't go any higher due to budget, you have to work with that and tune your code a little better for Azure, right? And it gives you the cool tools to use it with. Again, it's more in-depth than what we can go through today, but the Query Performance Insights shows you with the query store information, and you can go through and see which ones gave you the highest plan or the highest DTU, highest data IO. I have a blog post on it. It's about one of my clients they were trying to get out of a premium pool because it was costing them so much money, but they had to be there because of the IOPS. So what we ended up doing was we tuned about 10 queries and reduced over 10 billion with a B, reads to get them down to a standard pool. So it's just because the maintenance is gone doesn't mean that there's any less work. It actually, requires a little bit more in-depth work because you have to know how everything coordinates. With the no cross-database queries, you have to create different tables for that to work, to secure your data, creating certs and storing them the right way. It comes down to a lot of things. I really don't think the jobs are going to go anywhere for a while.
All right.
So to answer the person's question about do you need to have replication set up when you do your failover groups, you do not. It looks like it created it for me right off the bat. So you can just create the failover group and it sets up your secondary, your geo-replication for you because it's on Flopperty now, and we'll see it. It says it's not configured, but I'll have to dig into that one because I don't know how it got there. I guess it doesn't have to be replicated for that to work. So who knows? It could just be a bug.
Okay. Jim, one last question.
Sure.
And it ties on to the IP address one from earlier. Jim said he got notified of an attempt from UK. Surely that would have been outside his corporate IP address. Thus, I would have expected an automatic rejection of connection request. Thus, when would or not that alert get posted?
So it wasn't outside of our corporate IP address range. We have a range for the UK. The problem is that since I worked for a healthcare company, patient data was not allowed to leave the UK shores. So when I saw the probe come from an IP address in that range, I had to block it because I didn't know what kind of attempt was being made. All I saw was somebody was trying to access our server from the UK, and they shouldn't have been. That's why I said we put the block in.
All right. Well, thank you, Jim. This wraps up our session for this week. And if you want to come back to talk about those other pieces that you mentioned earlier, I will reach out to you to make sure we can get that scheduled. Anyone else, if this inspires you to talk or provide a talk for this virtual group, please reach out. Always looking to get more presenters and giving people, whether you're just starting out or whether you've been doing this for years and years, everyone's got a seat at this table to talk about because everyone's got good ideas. So thanks again, Jim.
No problem. Thank you guys for having me.